Hello, everyone. My name is Mariette DiChristina, and I'm the Dean of Boston University's College of Communication. I'm also an alum and the parent of a recent BU grad. Welcome to today's panel discussion, The Truth You Need to Succeed at Work. This is part of our ongoing virtual series called COMTalks. This session is being recorded and will be available later on COM's website and YouTube channel. The working world is rife with tired tropes about what women need to do to get ahead, like fake it till you make it. Good things come to those who wait. And of course, you can have it all. These and other common cliches hold women back, however, and can lead to self-sabotage. Our expert panel of women leaders and mentors will expose the lies and uncover the truth about what it takes to succeed. There'll be plenty of time for you to ask your questions later. And when you do, would you please put the questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat? And now let me introduce our wonderful speakers. First, let's say hello to Bonnie Hammer, Vice Chairman, NBC Universal. Bonnie is a BU alum with degrees from COM, SED, and an honorary degree. She's just written a terrific book called 15 Lies Women Are Told at Work and the Truth that We Need to Succeed, which we'll be discussing today. And now I'd love to welcome Bonnie. How are you doing there? Sorry.
I'm great. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining. And now I'd like to welcome also my friend and Dean of Boston University Questrom School of Business, Susan Fournier. Hi there, Susan.
Hello.
I'll also be joining as a speaker. And I'm delighted to have our moderator today, who is Erica Hill, anchor and national correspondent of CNN, and another fellow COM alum. Now I'll pass the mic to Erica. Thank you.
Mariette, thank you. And thanks to everyone who is joining us today. I too have really been looking forward to this. I'm excited to moderate the panel, but also to learn from everyone on the panel. Bonnie's book, which comes out next week, is really phenomenal. And I found something, Bonnie, I will say, I think it has something for someone at every stage of their career, which I know you're touching on. And I think you've maybe heard that from early readers too. This is not just something to buy someone as a graduation gift. You can look back on this at every stage in your career. I think probably one of the first questions that people would have, Bonnie, is you have this incredible career. Why did you decide to write this book and to tackle these 15 myths, these lies that we're told at work?
Couple of reasons. One is I'm finally at a point in my own life where I'm agenda free. I have no corporate pressures. I'm not trying to climb. I don't want more money from them. So I can actually reflect and look back at my experience, what it was like to try to navigate the work world. And I figured that for me at this stage, the thing I could do best is to somehow pay it forward. And I love being a mentor, or I should say a mentor. I wish they put a WO in front of that. And kind of love helping people find their way. And now I can finally look back because I've learned, I've worked, I've been fired, I've tripped up. And I've succeeded. So through all of this, there's a lot of experience that I can kind of push forward the truth rather than the lies of what you need. Because we've been brought up in so many ways with so many aphorisms and nice sound bites that sound like sound advice, but it's not. They're lies that can lead to self-sabotage.
So let's start off with one of those lies, which is that you should follow your dreams. Follow that passion. The reality is, as you point out in the book, that can be really limiting, Bonnie, to take that path, especially when people may not even really know what that dream is.
Erica, that's so true. And I think right now, as we look and we come towards commencement, and many commencement speakers are going to be up there saying, follow those dreams. You have a passion. You had a favorite course. Just go for it. The reality is that what we know at college, and no less what we're told as young kids, these fantasies, these passions, when we really haven't lived a life, thinking that it would be wonderful to follow that and do that for life's work, we have no real sense of, A, if we could do it, what it's really like in a work setting, And it's very narrow. We don't have experience enough to see if that is real or if it's something that our parents or a friend or a cartoon whispered in our ear at some point in our life. And I know from my own experience, thank you, BU, I was passionate about photojournalism, and I had a phenomenal professor at BU in photojournalism. And I spent years literally trying to navigate that world. And I realized it was a passion, but it wasn't getting me anywhere in the work world. And it wasn't until I tripped into a job taking photographs in a TV show for free, because it was freelance, that I was able to push my passion aside and actually realize that television, still telling stories and being in an environment that was so much more active and fun and had so much growth potential, was even available. So I ended up kind of putting my camera aside. It's still my best friend. It's just not my boss. But it goes to talk to open your eyes for the opportunities that are in front of you. See what's out there. Don't be afraid to experiment. You could always go back to the passion, but don't limit yourself to one thing. It could be basically that little dream could turn into a nightmare because you're basically sleepwalking through potential opportunities.
It also speaks to, something else I know you've touched on, and I think everyone on the panel can weigh in on too, is zigzagging through your career, as opposed to this idea that you have to shoot straight up and that the next opportunity is the one you have to go through. Zigzagging can actually be much more fulfilling personally, but it can also be much more fulfilling professionally. If you could touch on that, and then I want to bring everyone in on that point, if we could.
Sure. We have been brought up, specifically women, because there are fewer of us in the workplace, believing that the only way up is rung by rung by rung in a ladder. And the only way to go is up to succeed. The truth is, it's very narrowing. It's very limiting. The more experience, more opportunities, the more people you can meet by zigzagging, literally going right, going left, going on an angle, creating almost a web of experience gives you so much more possibility. It gives you exposure. It will create opportunities should your job go away, because the world has changed. AI has come in. So many things will change your environment. If you're stuck believing that the only way you can grow is in one direction, it's tremendously limiting, almost like just believing in your dreams. But getting experience widely, getting more skills, meeting more people gives you so much more possibility in life. I zigzag like crazy, not so much I did it, but my company and my job and where I was sold so many times. I had so many different bosses, which led me to different kind of titles, different kind of jobs. That's the only reason I am where I am today. If I decided I was going to be a chair of TV and just went in that one direction, I will almost guarantee I never would be sitting where I am today.
Susan or Mariette, did either one of you at one point say, I'm going to be the dean?
No.
No.
I guess I'm in first for that, because that was never on the plate of aspirations. And I think what I would add to Bonnie's points, which I echo strongly, is the role of serendipity. And I think Bonnie's point about having a narrow mindset, it does put blinders on for things that do just happen, that you could just not even see and ignore. And things like that do come up. I mean, in my personal life, I will say that's how I ended up with a husband of 40 years, walking a dog down one side of the street while he was walking the other. But there's a paper I love in academia, psychology. It's called Chance Encounters and Life Paths. And it was written by a very famous psychologist named Bandura. And he just analyzed all the kind of decisions that we make across every domain, and had a whole thesis that supported that the most important things that affect us the most are the most serendipitous. And they're driven more by chance and chance encounters than planning and this step by step and rung by rung and straightforwardness that Bonnie is talking about. So it is like, I think you have to widen your frame and you just have to be open. I think that definitely explains why I'm sitting here in a dean role, and a lot of other things. The other point I might add in to Bonnie's excellent point, about the widened frame, like, maybe we're not maybe supporting, abandon everything you ever thought about as a passion, because there are kernels in there. There are things that are going to ground you at your center and at your core. And I'm going to oversimplify, but photojournalism, and then in film, I mean, there's some commonality there, right? Like there's a storytelling aspect that you mentioned, and using different media kind of to do that. And so I think it's also like being able to see your passion in a multifaceted way that allows you to interpret it differently when you come across it, and it does fuel pieces of that passion. We see this a lot, Questrom School of Business, just working with students who are thinking, I'm graduating with my MBA, and they have a fixation. I am going to McKinsey, and they come in with it and they're looking for it, and we work really hard to kind of get at, well, why is that a passion, and then how can you open the aperture, kind of going on the photojournalism metaphor there,
I like that.
to see other things. Yeah.
I like it when we weave a thread through. It works. Mary, you said too, you didn't necessarily set out to be the dean. I remember when you came to and meeting you for the first time, and you've infused such energy, and it's so great to have you in this role. But it wasn't necessarily what you set out for either. So just being open to Susan's point, being open to that serendipity, and to Bonnie's point, looking for, or maybe not looking for as much as following those opportunities, and taking a chance.
Mm.
Yeah, it was definitely a zigzag for me to come to the college. I mean, it seems like a funny thing to say that, but the professor that talked me into journalism when I was 19 years old at BU, because I was taking his class and really enjoying it, but it never occurred to me that, I could be a journalist. So one day he sat me down after class and said, "What are you majoring in?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "You should go into journalism." The same professor 30 years later, talking about serendipity and a zigzag. Now, 30 years later, I was editor-in-chief, the first woman editor-in-chief, by the way, of Scientific American. And he wrote to me, "The dean is retiring, the current dean, and you should really apply. You've
Oh,
been
boy.
doing what you've been doing a long time. I know you like it, but you might like this." And so I trusted his advice twice, and he changed my life twice. Kind of amazing.
There you
Sounds
go.
Sounds like a mentor as well, not just a former professor.
Yeah,
I
Bonnie,
like
and
that you're reading my mind, Bonnie, because
yeah,
that's where we're going next.
he's a sort
So
of
in
mentor to
terms
really
of
old too. Yeah, go ahead.
so
Yeah,
definitely sounds like a mentor.
yeah.
When the blurb came out, so we got a notice through that your book was coming out, Bonnie, and I said, full disclosure, I sent Bonnie an email and I said, this is amazing, because there was a mention in there about mentors, and I thought to myself, I've never really had a mentor in the 25 plus years of my career, and maybe this will help me do it. And I think, Bonnie, one of the best things that your book does is really reframe the thinking around who and what is a mentor. What does that mean? What is the real role that you should have, perhaps, in your career path, and what you should be looking for? And I love your definition of it. So just walk us through, in your view, what and who actually is a mentor.
Okay. I view mentors basically in two columns. And there's the supportive mentor, and there's what I call the challenging mentor. That most of us, and in particular, most women, have been brought up to believe that a mentor is someone in a high place, who has all these connections, who's going to pat you on the back, be your cheerleader, rah, rah, and basically support you in anything you want to do in any way, shape, or form. Then there is the challenging mentor that are more like drill sergeants. They push you. They show you what you're capable of, even if you don't think you're quite there yet or capable of it. They tell you the truth, even though it may be hard to hear. And I believe that challenging mentors are way more important in terms of growth I don't need another friend to basically tell me what I want to hear and that I'm really great at that or I look good in that. I always wanted somebody who was going to be a truth teller and basically tell me if I was capable of something, push me towards it. And if I wasn't, I wanted to know that too. So I can kind of go right or go left and go another direction. I was very lucky. I had some great challenging mentors. My first one was Harris Smith at BU, who was the photo professor, who literally one day held up one of my photographs in front of the entire class. Now, granted, this was senior year, so there were only like 16 of us left, not 70 in the class. Held up a photo and said, Bonnie, why did you show up today? This is a piece of crap. You can do better. Come back when you can. I got kicked out of class. And he was right, because I was kind of busy over the weekend and I didn't spend any time doing it. And he was 100% right. For the rest of the term, I didn't hand in anything that wasn't the best of what I could see. Later on, I had the most challenging mentor of mentors, who to this day is still a mentor of mine, even though he was a friend. It's Barry Diller. And Barry Diller really taught me how to think. And probably his ways back when I worked for him directly may be considered a little bit too drastic for today's HR departments and our world the way it is. But he taught me how to think. He taught me that if I was pushing or asking for something, that I had to argue for it and I had to have the facts and I had to do my homework. And he also basically put me in a position after I learned that I could go toe to toe with anybody as long as I did my homework and long as I understood what I was asking for and why. And most of the time I would get it. And if I didn't, I was never embarrassed because I still did my best, even if I didn't get the yes. So to me, challenging mentors are very important. Women tend to shy away from them because they're less pleasant at times. And I think stylistically, how we do it is also important when you have a tough mentor. These days, different, as I said, than 10, 20 years ago.
It is a little different. I wonder too, Bonnie, if part of that is maybe people not honestly knowing how to receive that tough love. How important is that? And this is something too that certainly for the students at BU right now, the tough love part of it is important, but also knowing, as you're pointing out, Bonnie, how to take that information and work with it, that it's not attacking you personally.
Correct.
It's helping you professionally.
Correct. There are two things that are very important. One, that you can literally look at these people and believe they are doing it for your best, end. That it's not about being mean or cruel or negative or competitive. They are trying to help you. So you have to be secure enough in your own self to basically accept the fact that there's no reason they would waste their time unless they believed in you. But more than ever, as someone who is becoming a mentor more and more, is the style in which we deliver it and how we deliver that kind of information or criticism or news is incredibly important. And that more people have to learn how to do if they want their information received and the person they're giving to grow. So it's stylistic on both sides. You got to understand how to take it, but you also have to be able to give it in the right way. I'm sure, Susan, you know that in terms of all of what you've done.
Susan, too, isn't there, I think for a lot of people, there's this idea that a mentor is a very formal relationship, that it's maybe not looking back and realizing at different points in your life, oh, in those moments, that person actually was a mentor. I see it maybe more in hindsight, but that you're going to someone, you say, hey, will you be my mentor? And Susan, I know you point out there's a really important difference between mentoring and networking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for those questions, Erica. This is a really important point. And I have a couple of anecdotes that are kind of fun in that. I do think there's misunderstanding in general, as Bonnie mentions too in her book, about what a mentor is. And I do think often in general, people think it's very instrumental. It's something that's just connecting you and helping you meet people, get to know people. There is therefore a total overlap with, well, no, that's networking. Networking is when, as Bonnie describes it, relationships beget relationships. And a lot of times I see that again, if we go to students, they want a mentor because they think they're going to help them get a job. And BU has a mentor program in their BU Connects. And I had someone come to me, I got assigned a mentor, so this is, and he didn't help me get a job. I'm aspiring to be a surgeon. And they gave him like a supply chain guy, So both people were very unhappy because they're like, well, why am I in this? So there's also this sort of like, maybe you could say, reliance on these formal mentorship constructions where it's a program and you're going to put someone with someone. And it's really relational, and it has to be a desire on both sides. And the mentor has to be committed to be, in it for a while and committed to the development of that relationship. And so it's very different than networking. It's very much, when you read the literature about it now, the best mentors are almost more similar to coaches. And you can find coaches all over the place because they're going to help you in certain domains. And they're kind of, again, kind of committed to that. I was at a talk, the president of the US Chamber of Commerce, and she was addressing a conference of business school deans. So there were 500 of us in the room. And someone asked, you have a room full of business school deans. What would you, suggest to us that we should have in mind? And she says, stop telling your students to go find a mentor. I get phone calls. I mean, will you be my mentor? And she said something like, be your mentor? We haven't even had coffee. Like, I don't even know who you are. And like, we're jumping into this thing together, right? So there's kind of that, and Bonnie, you say the same thing. Don't ask if you can be my mentor. Ask if I could have a cup of coffee with you. And even if you have, one issue that you're thinking about, you're getting coached, you're getting that benefit. It doesn't have to be this, months long, years long, decades long. That it's a portfolio of kinds of mentors that are going to play roles in your life.
And that's a great point. We have oh, sorry, Bonnie, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's so true. People want to put a label. And my line basically is forget about calling it anything. It's just once it walks like a mentor, talks like a mentor, call it whatever you want, just accept the advice and the friendship.
Yeah. And then maybe if I could add one point about that accepting of it, advice. I think I want to highlight a couple of complications with the kind of the ideal theory here. All in on Bonnie's concept of the challenging mentor. This is really where you're going to learn a lot. And I don't know, there's a cultural narrative right now where people are, I'm going to generalize for the sake of argument, but people do find it very hard to be pushed, to be challenged, to be criticized. This can get very political very fast. I've been singled out, and gosh, let's put women in the mix. It was, gender, and it was harassment. And like, if we're gonna lean into this concept, we have to lighten up on being mistreated and accepted as being mentored. And I'm just gonna put that out there.
Well, that
the other thing
comes back to receiving the information, right? Like you have to be willing to receive that information.
Yes, we have to. Bonnie, do you?
It's so, I couldn't agree with you more. And even in writing this book, I had to be very careful. The words I chose in order to go through the legal departments of the publishing company, because there's such a sensitivity to doing anything that's going to make people run to HR and complain or whine. But I also believe to some degree, our generation, not yours, have hurt our kids a bit, because when I grew up, there were no participation trophies. There were no A's for effort. We were bruised a lot more as kids going through the system, because at least my parents realized unless you fell, tripped, you had to get up, you had to brush yourself off, and you had to try again. now we've made life almost too easy for the kids navigating the world, that they don't expect to be told bad things. Even if they're not doing great, they want people to believe they're doing good enough. And I think that's a real problem with the kids growing up in this generation. And then all of the support around it, because of everything that's going on in our world, not to harass, not to say negative things, not to ever, basically touch somebody's shoulder and say, hey, that wasn't good enough today, which is a gesture I grew up with constantly, where somebody would put their hand on my shoulder and go, I didn't like that essay you wrote. I know you can do better. And most of the time I would say you're 100% right, because I spend 5 seconds on it. It's hard to do. And I'm hoping our world self-corrects, because I think it's going to be problematic for the kids getting through their work life and their life in general. But that is a political topic. I'm not sure I don't know how deeply we can go in that today.
We only have an hour and we only have 35 minutes left. But we could schedule a separate session just on that. I think you would have a lot of takers. There's a great question in the chat right now. And Mariette, I'm going to throw this one to you. Someone writes in to ask if you're ever too old for a mentor. What are your thoughts?
I don't think you ever are too old for a mentor. In fact, I'm a good example of that. I don't know if I can confess how old I am right this minute, but it's easy enough to figure out with Google, right? When I first came to the college, I decided to have breakfast with a former, I was actually the former business school dean before Susan. And I was feeling 8 kinds of uncertain. And this leads to some advice that I'd like to share, building on what Bonnie and Susan have shared, which is, when you have an opportunity, you should ask and then really listen. So we were having breakfast. I was feeling very uncertain about how I might like to pursue a new strategic plan with the college. And I was just talking about that with this person. And he said, you know what you're doing. You go ahead and do it. And I really listened to that feedback and took it on board. And I didn't do what I often do, which is, oh no, I'm not good enough, this or that. So don't be defensive. Listen and take it in when you do have those opportunities. So yeah, nobody is too old for a mentor.
Yeah, which is great. This came up briefly. I think this is probably one of the topics that will get the most attention in your book, Bonnie. This myth of you can have it all. I think anyone who's tried to have it all knows that that is absolutely a lie. But you will have choices. So talk to us, Bonnie, about how you reframe this and looking at that as these choices and what that's meant for you in your career and in your personal life.
Yeah, the only time anyone can even seem to have it all is in hindsight. This feminist fable that we've all fed into for so many years is just that, a fable. First of all, there's no such thing as all, because Erica, you're all versus Susan's all versus Mariette's all. All of our alls are different. So how do you even define what all is? What people do have, and what we have now that our grandmothers did not have, was the agency to take control of those choices and define what all is. What do I need very specifically? What makes me happy? How do I want to spend my days, my years, my life? And then you have to define, take those, understand that, and then navigate your world around it. But I can't tell you how many times people have said, oh my God, how do you do it? You have it all. And I just kind of chuckle. And my line in the book is, the only time a woman can have it all is on a bagel. And that's it. But it's a matter of choices, and it's a matter of understanding that you're always going to be off balance. That balancing is an act. Just an act. And the only reason I've been so good at it is that I've been exposed to so many great actors. I've learned from the best. But when you're at work, you feel like you're cheating your family. When I'm on vacation, I absolutely felt like I was cheating my team and the workplace. Even now, as an empty nester, I feel like I'm cheating on my dogs when I'm not home. So it's learning that you have to balance. Nobody can have it all. that you have to not only make choices, but very specifically define those choices to who you are, and forget about how other people are judging you based on those choices, and live those out.
Which is so important. It's also, Mariette, I wonder if you feel that it's also helpful when you actually talk about it out loud, because there is this sense of people look at you from the outside and they think you have it all, right? They have no idea what's actually happening. So to talk about the mess and the struggle and the guilt and the difficulty that you feel, how helpful is that, Mariette?
I think it is important. So when I was appointed as editor-in-chief, the first woman at Scientific American, I remember getting irritated at how people were making such a fuss because my kids were 9 and 13, and my husband was working part-time, and everybody was saying, "She has it all. She has it all. Like, how are you doing it?" I had, people saying this. And I remember I did what I often do, which was talk to my kids and say, why are people, we were just talking over the dinner table. I said, why is this such a big deal to everybody? I almost feel funny about it. I didn't want to make a big deal about it. And my older one, who was always very wise, said, well, mommy, of course people need somebody to look up to. And so I thought, all right, I'm the one who's got to change my tune here and start to talk about it. And then, it was much easier for earlier career folks to approach me. It was much easier for them to see it's not some kind of perfection that I'm living, but like everybody else. And I love what Bonnie said. All of our alls are different. All of our alls are different. And we should
Yeah.
celebrate those differences and also support each other when we're running over the bumps in those differences.
I remember.
Susan, I know you. Oh, go ahead, Bonnie.
I just remember when Jesse was young, he was having his games on the weekend. I didn't know the other mothers in the community. Also, Jesse's last name is different from the name I go, work-wise. And everybody looked at me like, oh my God, this is a working mother. What is she doing here finally on a Saturday? And the only way I could navigate that world was to basically be honest about it and figure out a way to get myself in that community. So I literally took pictures of all their kids playing games, and this was the old days too. I had them developed, and the next week came back and gave out photographs for free, just so I could feel like I belonged in the community, because I so felt guilty about not being like them during the week and every weekend. It's hard.
It's really hard. Susan, I know there were points when Bonnie was talking about some of the choices that she made, you really identified with some of
Oh my
those,
gosh.
especially when it comes to having a family.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I was really having like an out of body experience when I was reading the book, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like Bonnie. I mean, it was Bonnie made a point in there about fundamental choices she made. Because I would say up front, it's not balanced. I personally have never felt balanced. I feel that the balance is part of the mythology, and that when you make a choice, the scale tips and you're favoring one over the other. And so to me, then it's, what are those big choices? And you have to own your choices and the trade-offs that makes you make. So when I was reading Bonnie's book, the 3 choices, they affect your life trajectory. And by fundamental association, they affect your career trajectory if you're a woman, because there's a lot that happens in a woman's career path. So the things that I resonated with Bonnie, she said, okay, first thing I did is I channeled all my energy into my career throughout my entire 30s. Check. I did that. I didn't, another one is, I only had 1 kid. I did too. I mean, imagine, I literally would have maybe a 1,000 times the thought of, OMG, what if I had more than 1 kid? I don't know how that would have happened. And I didn't have him until I was 41. So my 30s were career. I didn't have any guilt, any shame. It was all about the career, and that was the choice. And boy, does that have consequences? You bet it does, but that was the choice. Then having only 1 kid, partially because that choice was made for you, You have problems. I had problems. Maybe I could have had more, but it didn't work out that way. And then the other thing I think she brought up as an enabler, which is it's a thing that happened, and it's partly a choice, but an enabler, one of these serendipity moments, marrying the right guy. Um, if you're gonna do those two things, you have to have the right partner who is there, who's gonna step in when you step back and all of that. It's absolutely fundamental. Like if I was with someone who was like Bonnie, I don't know what we would have done, but we never would have both been able to do it, right? So I am with her. The guilt never really goes away. Definitely I live in a small town, 4,000 people, 5 working women. Took me forever to find even who they were.
Because they were at
I
work.
mean, yeah, there weren't any. So you're always kind of alone. You're always second guessing. You're always feeling bad. You're always kind of lonely. And then, but it never goes away. It's coming back. Personally, for me now, it's my 91-year-old dad, and what are my choices and how am I managing this? And my sister is stepping in, and should I be helping her? And so I do think even there, when you think you're kind of over it, here it comes back again. So anyway, I really resonated with that theme.
Yeah. Yeah,
The
it
only
really is always there.
Yeah.
We are getting some great questions in the chat, and they are things that are definitely addressed in Bonnie's book, and I know that they resonated with everybody on the panel as well. So Krishna writes in a great point talking about as a woman, especially as a woman of color, how she struggles with imposter syndrome.
These are great.
Especially when she's in her industry, looks a lot different from her peers, feels like she doesn't belong. I've always tried just subscribing to the fake it till you make it mantra. Does it actually work? How do we as women get past focusing on our failures and feeling genuinely confident? So there's a lot in there. But imposter syndrome, fake it till you make it. This, I think, is such an important chapter and myth that you are tackling, Bonnie, because don't do it.
First and foremost, everybody, male and female, experiences feeling like an imposter, not at some point, but at most points in their life, in their career. So first, you got to understand everybody feels the same thing, but are too afraid to talk about it, which is one of the problems. And if you can open up and kind of open that door to have that conversation and listen to somebody else, you're going to realize you're not alone. Secondly, fake it till you make it is one of the most destructive pieces of advice that people, and more importantly, women, because it's given to women more often than guys somehow naturally sashay into an office and make people believe they can do something. But the minute you are caught in a lie, the minute you seem like you're deceiving or pretending and you get caught, to build back that trust is so tough. It's just not worth it. The other thing that is the most important in terms of getting rid of that cliche is that once you start asking for help, once you start admitting what you don't know, it empowers people to help you. And you'll be shocked how people want to help, that if you're giving them the power to take you under their wing so they can help you, as long as you're honest, you are basically willing to learn and admit what you don't know, and that you're willing to do the homework to learn and have a positive attitude about it. Just an optimism about, okay, I don't know this, but I can study, I can get it done. People are going to trust you and then want you part of their world. And that the optimism too is contagious. And somehow a can-do, upbeat, blue skies attitude will buy you far more than a skill set that you might be deficient of at that moment. So faking it is so destructive, and guys feel it too. They just demonstrate it differently. But almost every single woman I've worked with, who's worked for me, who I've worked for, have lived through this and experienced it. It's only now that we're starting and willing to at least chat about it among people. But empower people to help you, be honest. And every time I've done it professionally, Someone has taken me in. The first time I edited in Los Angeles, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I walked in, the editor, and I was in my 20s, he was in his 30s, adorable, drives a Porsche to the editing site. I'm intimidated as hell. And he goes, okay, so what do you have for me? And I just said, I know what the material is. I know everything we're supposed to do. I've never edited a piece of film in my life. He literally said to me, okay, Bonnie, we're going to make you a star. And he did. I empowered him to help me. I didn't have to play games. I didn't have to pretend to think about questions. I didn't even know what the question was about. And I enjoyed the journey. And that's what it's really all about.
And I would say getting that advice earlier on, because obviously the more you advance in your career, but the more you advance in life, the older you get, the more confident you are in who you're becoming with every decade. So it's easier to say, oh, I don't know, because you feel confident enough in who you are, maybe. So especially as you're younger and embarking on this journey, Mariette, I would think this is such powerful advice for men and women, but mostly for women, especially students as they're moving out there, as we're approaching commencement, moving out into the workforce, to know that one of the most powerful things you can do in the workplace is say, I don't know that. I don't understand that, but I want to.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely a powerful thing to do, because it's when you sit by yourself, it's when you try to make it look like you know what you're doing, that you're leaving yourself the most vulnerable. And you don't mean it that way. And we've all done it, as Bonnie says, and we've done it often, felt insecure often. And one thing for the imposter syndrome folks who are watching and listening, which I'm certainly a member of that club, one trick I did for myself to try to get past that. Well, I'll give you an example. I was in journalism class with that professor who scolded me to go into journalism. And at the time, there was no Googling, there was no social media. It was the phone and you, or your feet and you, to go and interview people. And I would write all my questions down and then be terrified to dial the phone, to make the call, to impose on somebody's time. And I noticed when I did that, the nervousness in my voice would freak out whoever was on the other line. So one day I thought to myself, I have to make them less nervous. So I calmed my own voice and sounded more reasonable, authoritative, asking questions about things I didn't know or things that I did. And I found that they responded beautifully. And in my head, I'm thinking I'm helping them. Really, I was helping both of us. And that's how you can think about it too, that you're helping both of us in any connection that you have in the workplace, if you're, willing to say what you know and you don't know.
Suzanne, I know you've also said that what feels like a lack of confidence in these moments can actually really be a motivator. It can energize you. It can be exhilarating. I mean, if you just reframe that lack of confidence. So what do you think is the best way for people to do that, to harness that energy in a more positive way?
I think that is the solution, and it is a framing, which means it's in your head, right? I mean, you just have to train yourself to approach it that way. To say, I'm not going to have a negative framing. I'm not going to think about this as devastating, debilitating. I'm going to think of it as, growth mindset, positivity, energy, opportunity, chance for growth. And I guess it really, to me, is a discipline. Like, you have to force yourself to think that way, and maybe force yourself to acknowledge what others are saying, that it is a constant. Particularly if you're trying to grow in your career. You will constantly, like, I remember the first even 2 years of the deanship, there wasn't one day when I would say, "Oh, I don't really know anything about that." I mean, it was just constant, and so you just have to get your mind, when you have these really kind of significant places where this is happening, that this is what it is. And you just have to, kind of think of it as, okay, I've got work to do. I mean, I've got work to do. I mean, I don't know if you can pull in your first gen spirit, or wherever you have to dig to find that. But that's a trait that some people can really cultivate, where you really just think hard and long about yeah, I'm going to get it done.
In
I-
terms of reframing too, Bonnie, you talk about winning isn't everything. The idea was winner takes all, winning isn't everything, but you also touch on failure. And so I think these things sort of go hand in hand, right? Recognizing there are things you don't know, having the sort of chutzpah to speak up when you need to, the honesty to say, I don't know what I'm doing. Often the fear in those moments comes from a fear of failure. If you don't know what you're doing, and you admit that to someone, but that failure is ultimately, and in most cases, Bonnie, that is really your learning, teaching moment.
Yeah, it's a couple of things in that. To go back to fake it, the way I frame it, being that Susan was talking about framing, is if you face it, you'll make it, as opposed to faking it. If you face anything, you can kind of get through it. And which leads to the whole idea of winning, losing, making mistake. We are all going to make mistakes. It's not that we make them, it's how we make them and how we recover from them, as opposed to defining if you make a mistake, you screw up, you do something wrong, or you outright fail, that, that's the end of the road. To me, I've always looked at it as a new beginning, whether it was a massive public failure, like a television series, we put in millions and millions of dollars and we just blew it. It's understanding why it happened so we don't do it again the same way. We'll make other mistakes. We had one in particular with a phenomenal cast of Sigourney Weaver, Ellen Burstyn. We spent, I think it was something like, 8-10 million an episode for 6 episodes, of a fabulous writer, fabulous director, you name it, it was in it. And we the lowest numbers we ever had, literally, when we got the ratings the morning after it launched. And we all looked at each other like, what the heck happened? This was crazy. It was also the first original show with a new boss. So not a great way to begin. And instead of moaning about what it was and then lying to my new boss upstairs, I literally sent an early email saying, I have no clue how it happened. Everything was in the sales. We really thought this was going to take off and be the highest rated thing we've ever done. And we're going to figure out why. And that's really, when you fail, when you make a mistake, instead of wallowing and wasting time and just bemoaning what happened, is take a look at it, figure out what went wrong, own the fact, admit the fact you blew something, or the team blew something, or I didn't understand something, so I got it wrong, and figure out what went wrong, as quickly as you can, and move on. And then just promise yourself you're not going to make the same mistake again. You will make other mistakes. It's inevitable, but it's learning from them. It's figuring out what you could do or what you won't do next time. That's the real reward of it. And if you use it positively that way, again, being optimistic about learning from how you screwed up, that makes a difference. And I can't tell you how many times I've messed up in different things personally as well as professionally, but I've owned them. I've laughed at them eventually, even though some of them were painful, and then moved on.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to get to a couple of questions that we have in the Q&A, because there's some excellent ones in here. Some of them are sort of related. Alejandra writes in, she just turned 30 a few days ago, so happy belated birthday, and is really just now embarking on her college career. She's pursuing a journalism degree and a certificate in pre-law, but she's a little worried that she waited until too late, that she should have done these things a decade ago. I think there's such a discussion right now about pivoting. Is it ever too late? Her question is, what would you say about timing for women in the workplace? I think you can interpret that a few different ways. Bonnie, I don't know if you want to tackle that, but in terms of timing, I guess the question is sort of, is it ever too late?
In my mind, it's never too late. And if anybody tells you that and tries to limit you that way, it's crazy. I mean, look at me at my age I just wrote a book out of nowhere. This is what I wanted to do 30 years ago, never got to it. I got it done somehow. I don't know how, but I got it done. I don't think it's ever too late. You never want to look back with a woulda, shoulda, coulda. Try. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it doesn't happen, but at least you never. My mother used to say to me, "You're only going to regret things you didn't do. You will never regret things you do, even if you fail at them. It's you'll look back and regret what you missed out on by your choice. Own it. Try it. Go for it. You'll never know if it's going to happen unless you try."
There's also a question, Bonnie, related to you just touched on that story about the series, that the one flop that you had, right? And how tough that was, and how you addressed it right away, which I think really speaks to this question that someone sent in, asking about suggestions or advice when there is a moment like this, or perhaps if a project didn't work out, you're trying to get hired again. How do you get back into the good graces of that company or that network or that boss?
Goes back to the same thing. Be honest and own it. We did a marketing campaign once just when GE NBC bought USA and Sci-Fi, which were independents before. We were owned by bigger companies, but they had no news divisions. It was a guerrilla marketing campaign. We were covering manholes with label. We were doing so many illegal things that we had done before in every single sci-fi series we ever did, because we had no money. We had to be creative. We did the same thing with M. Night Shyamalan, and a new series, a new movie he was launching. He was in it 100% of the time. It was a great, crazy marketing campaign, and we got nailed because I did not, I'm not going to put it even on my marketing team. I did not read the room. I did not realize now that a news company was part of our world, we couldn't break the rules, kind of in a sense, creatively lie about who was doing what, have press releases with fake names on them, which we had done tons of times. I didn't read the room. The day came, we got calls from the police, we got calls from legal, and I just had to go to my boss and just say, I screwed up. You know, my marketing time and I did what we did for what we had done for the last decade plus, always winning. And we didn't read the room. We will never do it again. We'll pass everything through our legal department from here on in and own it. And they could do nothing other than, they're not going to fire me at that point, because I admitted what I did wrong. I owned it in my voice only, didn't blame it on anybody on my team. I ran the team. It's my problem. And it became a joke years later, was pointed to, but I also had to apologize to, it just happened to be at a time where we were doing what we call the TCA, basically talking about all the shows that were coming up for the next part of the season. I had to go on the edge of a stage and apologize to all of the journalists because I led the journalists wrong. I basically caused one reporter who didn't read things thoroughly, but it was still my fault because it was a faux name on the press release, but he thought it was real. So own it.
You know, can I just throw in a very small little, this is something, Ken Freeman, who's our interim president, and he was previously dean of the business school, and I worked for him as his dean of faculty at the time. But he had this exercise that we all love over here. We're used to creating our resume, our CV, and it's, I was amazing. I had this job, I had that job. Here's my accomplishments. I grew revenue 5 times. I, turned around a failing ship. He used to advocate for creating a resume of failures. And it was, where you really came to terms and you had to force yourself to say what you learned from them. And he, I don't know that you hand this out in your job interview, but it's certainly something that you have in your pocket that really tries to capture some of what, Bonnie's advice is advocating. Like, really think about those things because they will help you be stronger next time.
I think that speaks to, there's a question in here from Sydney as well. Hi, Sydney, who was one of our interns here at CNN last year, who's a current comm student, who asked how not to take rejection personally, how to pivot after rejection. Making a list like that, I think maybe trying to, right, this goes back to receiving that information, that tough love, but maybe making a list like that could be a good way to deal with it and sit on it for a little bit, so that you're really soaking it in and figuring out what was meant by that advice that you were getting.
Yeah, another way to go is to become an academic where you submit papers every month and they get rejected for 20 years. So you can just kind of stun yourself into becoming a little more comfortable with it too, I think. Yeah.
I
Um,
also think that when you get rejected, and we all do, and we all will continue to get rejected, it's not see no as definitive. To me, it's just a word that means not now, not you, not me, not this moment, but it's not definitive. And just figure out a way to get around it, or what didn't work for you with that job interview or the resume you submitted, and do your homework so the next time, if it's not a yes, it's at least closer to a yes. I'm not big on the word no.
I love that. So we have just a few minutes left. I'd love to do a little round robin if I could with all three of you. You've all given such excellent advice today, and there's so much in Bonnie's book, which you should all read. I wonder if there's one thing specifically as we're approaching commencement. We do have some students with us. We also have some people who clearly from the chat are maybe looking at a pivot or maybe reevaluating where they're at right now. For someone who is embarking on that next chapter, what would your one piece of advice be? Mariette, I'm going to start with you because we haven't heard from you in a little bit.
Yeah, thanks a million. So one thing that I wanted to mention that's in Bonnie's book is that change is the only constant. And I'd like to pair that, and I want you to fully embrace that, looking forward in the world, whether you're a student who's graduating soon or somebody who's like me, been out for a while, and just understand that you can't control all those changes that are going to happen to you. And that's okay. It's not always going to be easy. And we all need girlfriends and other friends to vent to when that happens, or to commiserate with. But the thing you can control is what you do. And I would just encourage you to fully embrace the lessons that you get over time and use them to guide you with what you do. And I'd also like to say you've got this, even though sometimes it may not look that way.
Okay. Bonnie?
To me, exactly what Mariette said. I'm a big believer in the only constant in life that is change, which is why I write about it. And the only way to move through life is to embrace it and just go for the journey. Because if you waste your time and if you waste your life just moaning and groaning about it, you're going to miss life. You're going to miss half the journey. And part of that ties into something that I think too often people talk about in an unreal way. But I'm an optimist at heart, which doesn't mean I'm naive and think everything is wonderful. I don't believe everything is wonderful, but I look at things in a blue skies way, meaning that I look at the best out of what's going on, even in bad situations. All right, it happened. I feel lousy about it. I'll cry for one night, but the next day is okay. Let's move forward. Let's figure out how to get around it. Just having a positivity somehow gets you through life and the sadder moments or the changes or the rejections in a much healthier way, because you don't waste your life complaining and being a naysayer. You go forward looking for another way in, another door instead of a wall or an obstacle. So to me, it's embracing change, but being a blue skies person, being a bit of an optimist rather than being negative about daily life, which always has its woes somewhere.
Yeah. Susan, how about you?
I guess I'm gonna just build on the duo there. And maybe the third ingredient I would add on top of the positivity and the embracing of the change is then what's inside of you. I really just think you give it your best, you give it your all. You That's where you'll find, kind of where everything resonates and what makes you happy. So I would say whatever it's going to do, go for it. And if you find yourself not wanting to, then maybe that's not the choice.
Yeah, maybe that's a sign too. I'm not technically part of the panel, but I would throw one thing in if I could, which you touch on in your book, Bonnie, and I think is so, so important, is never forgetting the impact of kindness, right? And being kind to other people and how far that can really take you.
It is, to me, it is everything about life. is basically appreciating somebody when they are kind to you or generous with you or give you time. On the other hand, know that your words, everything you say and how you say it matters. And being kind, being humble, having humility, listening to people and caring goes more than anything like in life that you can do to or with another human being. So I believe in it. I live it as much as I can. I'm imperfect. Sometimes a nasty thing will come out, but you have to push me pretty far for that to happen.
Thank you all so much for being so generous with your time, for being so generous and open and honest in this discussion. And I know just from looking at the questions in the chat, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Some of them, though, will be answered if you read Bonnie's book, I promise. But thank you all for sharing. And I know how much everyone has really gotten out of it. It's been such a treat to be with everybody today. And I do want to point out that the first 100 people who registered and joined, and all of you who stayed, lucky you, we talked a lot about Bonnie's book. You're actually going to get a copy of Bonnie's book, which you should devour because it is really, it's really insightful and it's wonderful. Thank you all so much, Bonnie, Susan, Mariette. Lots for us all to think about.
And Erica, thank you. You've been great.
My pleasure.